Look around you. What can you see? Papa Tuanuku is here. Take notice. Breathe. Look at the colours, the textures. Watch how she moves. Take notice of everything. Her nooks, her patterns, her grooves. Now breathe. Slow down. Feel the air in your lungs. Feel the roughness, the softness. Taste the rain on your tongue. Breathe again. In. Hard and long. Listen. Do you hear that? The rustling and the songs, the songs, the songs. Look around at Papatuanuku, the vast green and the big blue. Step back. What can you see? Look how she's interwoven. Immerse yourself. Listen. Breathe.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koutou. I te kaupapa o te wā, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko le meza ho. I'm the chair of the Auckland Conservation Board, and I'm your MC for today. It's been a challenging few days for most of us, particularly those of us here in Auckland, so we're pleased to be able to continue with today's event, albeit in a different format. We thank you for joining us online, and I hear as well that we have people joining us from all over New Zealand, so this will be a little bit Auckland-centric, but you're very welcome. So to get today's agenda underway, I'd like to ask Ortene Rewiti of Ngāti Whātua Orokai to please open with a karakia.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Kia tātou e huitahi nei, rara tu marumaru o tēnei rangi, nā I roto tēnei āhuatanga o te rorohiko. No reira, kai inoi tātou. Let us give thanks on this opening today. You can follow me. I have, we've put up the words for you to follow. Kai inoi tātou. Kia tau nā manaakitanga a te mea ngaro. Ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia māhia te hua mā kihikihi. Kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori. Kia tūturu, kia whakamaua, kia tīna, hui e tai ki e. No reira I ngā mana I ngā reo, o ngā hau e whā. Mai te raki, mai te tonga, mai te rāwhiti, mai te uru. A tēnei te mihi o Ngāti Whātua ki a koutou nau mai, hara mai whakatau mai. Hara mai whakatau mai ki tēnei kaupapa e whāriki tia I roto te rorohiko I tēnei rangi. No reira, ka huri anō ki a rātou kua wheturangitia. Ngā mate ngā itu o koutou o mātou, ka tangi tonu tātou. No reira, haere atu rā. Rātou ki a rātou, te hungamate ki te hungamate, tātou ki a tātou. Ngā waihotanga o rātou mā. No reira, I ngā iwi, I ngā mana, rauranga tira mā, tēnei te mihi, a Ngāti Whātua, ki tēnei hui mā tātou. No reira, huri no, tēnā koutou, a piki mai, kake mai. Whakarongo ki te tangi a te huia mai tātou. Whiti kōrero whiua ki te au e. Hei mā taki, hei whakarongorongo. Mā te tini me te mano e. Tēnā koutou katoa, mauri ora.
Tēnei. Okay, I think we were moving to a video, but maybe not, so I'll carry on. As chair of the Auckland Conservation Board, which aspires to be the human voice representing Tāmaki Makaurau's natural world, I'm delighted to open for today's speakers and to be joined here today by so many of our fellow board members. Is the presentation going up? Excellent. The Auckland Conservation Board has 12 elected board members who are appointed by the Minister of Conservation. 3 of these members are nominated by iwi to represent the Mana Whenua o Tāmaki Makaurau collective. Typically, the Minister appoints for a 3-year term, which can then be extended for a further 3 years. I'm honoured that Minister Sage has extended my 2 terms by a further year to build on our board's momentum and to hand over to new leadership next year. Tāmaki Makaurau is part of a network of 15 conservation boards. Boards are independent bodies that empower local communities and iwi to contribute to the management of conservation areas by providing a voice for local concerns to gain traction in the Department of Conservation's work. The Auckland Board's jurisdiction covers an area of 2.4 million hectares, broadly aligned with Auckland Council's territory. The area also extends out to the 12 nautical mile limit with respect to coastal and marine issues, and out to the 200 nautical mile limit with respect to protected species. In 2014, Auckland's 10-year conservation management strategy, which was developed by the board at that time, was approved by government, and the current board is tasked with holding Te Papa Atawhai to account for its delivery. We also have responsibility to work with Mana Whenua on the co-design of conservation management plans for specific areas, for example, Hoturia Toi, and reviewing consents for activities on conservation land. Our role is to advocate for Auckland's nature, and Auckland's nature is under threat from climate change, development, pollution, and predators. New Zealanders, whether by birth or like me by choice, enjoy being in nature. Nature is vital for our well-being. It is absolutely true that healthy nature means healthy people. We take advantage of the huge range of outdoor activities, but it's also imperative that our access to nature does not threaten the natural world. So what is our board doing? The deep blue world defines us here in the city of Sails. We have 5 precious marine reserves, all in the Hauraki Gulf, including New Zealand's first marine reserve, Goat Island. Together, however, they only protect a tiny 0.3% of the waters of the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. We share the concerns of many Aucklanders about the impact of urban development on our marine environment. This is why we submitted to the EPA in 2018 against an application to consent vastly increased barge movements across the Hauraki Gulf to dump up to 250,000 cubic metres of dredge materials at sea. And we are pleased that CRL has now withdrawn their application. We have also advocated for local and central government to address sedimentation in the Okura estuary from housing developments. And this year we've submitted on the resource consent application by Kaipara Limited to extract up to 2 million cubic metres of sand within the coastal marine area offshore from Parkery Beach over a 20-year period. Awarohe is in the heart of the most diverse seabird region in New Zealand. Northeastern New Zealand has 41 breeding species of seabirds, 17 of which breed only in Aotearoa, making the northern North Island one of the richest endemic seabirds centres in the world. Rising sea levels and storms will push species which are already in trouble over the edge. Shorebirds like rare fairy terns will lose habitat. Fish catches and the size of shellfish in the Hauraki Gulf are already being impacted by warmer waters. And ocean acidification and fewer fish is already impacting on the health of seabird species that rely on fish for food. Vehicles on beaches are leading to the degradation of the very dune ecosystems which we are relying on to combat climate change. Out in Muriwai, and along the west coast. Beaches classified as roads at low tide are allowing vehicles to access dunes and destroy dune plants, hastening erosion, and the same vehicles are threatening the furry tern breeding grounds. To counter these impacts, we need to protect our natural dune systems and look after our forests. Almost 4,000 of our indigenous species are currently threatened with or at risk of extinction. This includes 90% of seabirds, 74% of terrestrial birds, 76% of freshwater fish, 84% of reptiles, and 46% of vascular plants. Faced with so many different species which are on the threatened or endangered list, our board has identified its Noah's Ark of Auckland-specific species which are under threat, so we can hold the department to account on how it's actively managing their conservation. In the past year, we've made 7 submissions on proposed projects or policy which will impact Auckland's biodiversity. We have asked to be heard by Auckland Council when it reviews the resource consent application by Waste Management for a new regional landfill at Waby Valley between Welsford and Warkworth. We are particularly concerned about its impact on nationally threatened or at-risk native fauna identified as present at the site. These include species that are already endangered, such as the Hochstetter's frog and the New Zealand long-tailed bat. Alongside the environmental impacts, the area has significant cultural and historical values to Mana Whenua. The ranges above the proposed landfill have hundreds of freshwater springs that move through this area and feed into the Hotio River. The Hotio River is of major cultural, spiritual and historical significance to iwi. Last week, we'd planned a visit to the Dome Valley to better understand these impacts. Like many things, it's being rescheduled. So our role is to stand up for nature. Amidst the silence during lockdown level 4, the natural world re-emerged as we started seeing and hearing native birds in our rohe. We were afforded the time to walk around our immediate vicinity and find places which we had not had time to visit before, and we now know what we're missing. By working together as government, industry, community groups and citizens, we can protect nature in the face of climate change and build resilience. It's up to all of us. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Aotearoa. We have extraordinary and unique plants and animals, found nowhere else on Earth.
We have the only alpine parrot in the world, the kia.
We also have Haumata the snow tussock, Tikumi the mountain daisy, and the grand skink.
We have Whio, the whitewater specialists. They have big webbed feet for negotiating rapids.
Hara, our native centipedes are as long as my arms. That's huge!
We have the biggest variety of ngata on the planet.
The Poelephanta weighs as much as a tui and lives for 20 years.
Kei roto I o tātou wawa, I roto I o tātou roto tētahi o nā tuna nui ra wātu o te ao, te tuna kūwharuwharu.
We have our beautiful native falcon, ka rea rea. It can fly at speeds over 100 k's and can catch prey larger than itself.
Our giant weta has its ears on its knees and is older than the dinosaurs.
Our albatrosses include the largest of all, the torua. One torua known as Grandma raised her last chick at 62.
And we have stinkball!
And we have tuatara, peripatus, pika pika taupoto, the short-tailed bat.
Kei konei hoki te pāteke, te kōkopu, te tūturi whatu me te titi.
We have precious kaka, kiwi, kakariki, hihi, kauri and takehi.
We have whakahau, sea lions.
The most species of penguins in the world.
Coastal peppercress, eyelash seaweed, and tohora.
Many of these taonga are in serious trouble. Some are threatened with extinction. We are kaitiaki and guardians of Aotearoa. We must love and protect what we have. Toi tū te marae a tāne māhuta, toi tū te marae a Tangaroa, toi tū te tangata.
What an absolutely fabulous video. I have great pleasure in welcoming the Honourable Eugenie Sage online today. Eugenie is the Minister for Conservation, Minister for Land Information and Associate Minister for the Environment. She's been a Green MP since 2011, and before that she was an elected Environment Canterbury Regional Councillor. For much of her adult life she has worked to better protect Aotearoa's natural landscapes and seascapes and the indigenous plants and wildlife that call them home, including 13 years with Forest and Bird. Welcome, Minister, and thank you for joining us.
Kia ora, Lynn. E mihi ana ki te rangi, e mihi ana ki te whenua, e mihi ana ki ngā maunga, a mihi ana ki ngā moana, e mihi ana ki a tātou katoa, Tāmaki Makaurau, Tāmaki heranga waka, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, kia ora. I'm so glad Te Papa Atāwhai screened that video. It always brings a bit of a lump to my throat because of the way in which it celebrates biodiversity and just the connection that we have with Papatūānuku and how much we can do to ensure that Papatūānuku thrives. And was really delighted last week to launch with, again, that was done online because of COVID, Te Mana o Te Taiao, the Aotearoa New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy, and really acknowledge all of you for the contribution that you may have made either directly through making a submission or just through kōrero and discussion that you had with others to the development of Te Mana o Te Taiao. I think it is a landmark document for Aotearoa. It is the result of a lot of mahi by Te Papa Atāwhai, by a lot of hui with mana whenua, with the 3 reference groups for Māori, for the science reference group and the stakeholder one. And as that film, the video highlighted, there are 5 key outcomes and 3 real themes to the biodiversity strategy. The first is getting the system right. Ensuring that we've got the structures, the plans, the institutions that will really help us ensure that Papatūānuku thrives. Then it's empowering action by all of us, whether it's as individuals, as Lynn said, taking a bit more time during the COVID lockdown to connect with nature, whether it's just a walk for exercise and being a bit more observant about the birds in your neighbourhood or the skinks, so that that connection with nature and empowering action so that then we work on the third theme, actual protection and restoration, whether it's a commitment with a voluntary organisation, professional work with a government agency or local government or iwi organisation, or just getting out there in your own backyard and setting traps. Because as Lynn has noted and as the video highlighted, nature in Aotearoa isn't thriving as well as it could. If we all work together, and the next step with Te Mana o Te Taiao, the biodiversity strategy, is developing an action plan. So if we all work together, we can actually ensure that a lot of our threatened species, their status improves. Over the last 20 years, we've got around 20 bird species from Tākahei to the Whio, whose numbers and populations have improved because we've had that partnership and because they've had intensive management. So now we'd just like to highlight some of the issues for me this year that and recently that have sort of really stood out. So the biodiversity strategy was one. Another has been just the work that predator-free Aotearoa has been doing. In terms of the charitable company Predator Free New Zealand Limited and that drive to predator-free Aotearoa by 2050. With the establishment of that charitable company and with the funding that has been able to be allocated to the Whangarei, Bream Heads area recently, just the weekend before last, to pest-free Banks Peninsula, quite a major injection of funding to enable community organisations, which had often been working on the smell of an oily rag, to really ramp up their programs for predator-free. And I know in the Hauraki Gulf, Te Kapa Moana Te Mana Nui a Toi, the Waiheke Island project, we launched that last year, and it's been developing those community relationships. But with predator-free whangarei, a huge amount of work that's been done in the Breamhead area and now being able to expand towards the city of Whangarei. So that ambition of being predator-free New Zealand by 2050 was once just a dream, but I think with the other launch this year of the Predator-Free 2050 strategy and the accompanying action plan, and then with this additional funding that government has been able to provide through the budget, we are well on our way to making progress, particularly given the huge increase in community engagement with backyard trapping groups all over the country. And also with the investment that has come through the Provincial Growth Fund. 19.5 million was allocated to Predator-Free NZ Limited last year. Quite a chunk of that, around 3 million, has been invested in developing new tools and technology, and really delighted with the work that is happening there, whether it is Auckland University working on naboramide, a new rat toxin, whether it is backyard inventors working out how to develop new traps, the work that Boffa Zero Invasive Predators and others have been doing on new auto-dispensing lures so that egg mayonnaise can be dispensed gradually and stay fresh. But there is a whole strategy now that we have developed to make that ambition actually come alive. So acknowledge, and I'm not sure because I can't see who's online, just anyone who is involved with predator-free mahi, whether it's in your backyard, your local community, or on one of the Hauraki Gulf Islands. And I think there was really delighted to be on Aotea Great Barrier recently to celebrate with Ngāti Rehua and Ngāti Manuhiri and Papa Atawhai and the local community the major achievement in making Rakatu off the coast of Aotea predator-free. That whole project and the use of brodifacoum to get rid of rats had a bit of a rocky road with community consultation, but the fact that the conservation dogs had gone on there recently and been able to establish that there were no rats left is an enormous step forward, because Rakatu is the last of the Motuhi Islands that Te Papa Atawhai is responsible for that still had predators on it, and now they have gone. So it is, because of its location, a major part of the seabird highway. There would have been seabirds in massive numbers there once, and now with rats having gone, there is the opportunity for seabird numbers there to really thrive again. So congratulations to the leadership of Mana Whenua and the really hard mahi that the Department of Conservation team put in there, and the real success that's been generated there. COVID, of course, brings its challenges, and really underline the point that Lynn made about taking the time in Tāmaki Makaurau while you're on lockdown to really get up close with nature and just slow down a bit, recognise the huge economic challenges and the personal challenges to many with their own businesses that COVID has caused. What the government has done there, and what I'm really proud of, is the commitment through Jobs for Nature to nature and investment in nature being a key part of our recovery from COVID, with 1.3 billion in the Jobs for Nature project. And that 1.3 billion across 4 government agencies Te Papa Atawhai DOC is working at pace to ensure that projects are established, and they are as diverse as working with mana whenua and with councils on rivers like the Hotio that Lynn was mentioning, feeding into the Kaipara, and ensuring alongside Ministry for the Environment, MPI and LINZ, that there's a lot more funding going into weed and pest control, biosecurity work, fencing of waterways, planting of waterways, really ensuring that there's new jobs to provide opportunities for people who've lost their jobs through no fault of their own, but through COVID, to help restore Papatūānuku. So it is a major program. I know people want it to be rolled out really quickly, and can I assure you that the department and other agencies are doing that as fast as they can. So also with the budget, as well as the 1.3 billion for Jobs for Nature, there was 76 million provided for Predator Free New Zealand Limited, the Crown company I was mentioning before, and that is enabling it to really invest in these landscape scale restoration projects through partnerships between mana whenua, councils, the department, and community organisations. So look forward to seeing some more of those throughout the motu. Recognise that we are really making progress on land, but in terms of Te Kapa Moana, Te Mananui Atoi, sea change is happening with the Ministerial Advisory Committee, due to make some recommendations to ministers later this year. But we are going there much more slowly than we have on land. We've got a lot of catching up to do, and was really encouraged to be part of the mussel restoration project that the Nature Conservancy, Auckland University, Ngāti Manuhiri and others have been involved in earlier this year, and really recognise the potential to restore a lot of the mussel beds throughout the Gulf, but the requirement there for significantly increasing the funding and for dealing with some of the biosecurity challenges when mussels are being brought from the Firth of Thames and the processes that add expense there. But be assured that really whoever's elected post-election really needs to put greater focus on the marine space to do that catch-up that's needed when you compare with what action we've taken on land. There has been a lot of work done on the Hectors and Maui Dolphin Threat Management Plan, and that's led to some quite significant measures to improve the prospects for those species. But there are so many more fish, seabirds that really need a greater focus to improve their prospects. So the challenge, I think, in conservation work is recognising that it requires stamina, a long-term vision, mustering the funding, and also connecting the people, because as the video highlighted, people thrive when we have a healthy natural environment. And so it is often that working in collaboration, cooperation, looking at what are the common goals when sometimes groups and organisations need to sort of adjust to the way each other works, so that we can put our mahi towards a shared goal that we all have of ensuring that Papatūānuku thrives for its own sake, and of course as the basis of our own well-being. So I'm sorry that COVID means we can't be there in person, and I'm also really sorry that the inability to present the Loader Cup, because can't do that in person, for recognition of substantial achievements in the botanical area, but really delighted that Conservation Week is still happening, though it's largely online, and that it's a chance for people to celebrate what makes us special in Aotearoa, and it is part of it is the distinctive plants, wildlife, landscapes that we have in these islands. The fact that so many of them are endemic found nowhere else on Earth. So many of them need a helping hand from us as humans. So many of them need us to recognise our past history in these islands, which, having been one of colonisation and overwhelming the Indigenous character, now turning that around, recognising the mistakes of the past and working together to forge a real vision for Aotearoa of one where our Indigenous plants, wildlife, landscapes, the culture that is based on that really thrives. So thank you for all of the mahi and your commitment to Papatūānuku, not just this week, but all year, and the work that you are doing either as individuals or as part of organisations, community groups, professionally, to assist the plants and wildlife with whom we share these islands of Aotearoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, kia ora. Happy to answer any questions.
I'm just trying to see if we've got some questions coming through, Minister.
Maybe no one's listening.
Maybe it's just you and I. Oh, hang on. I've got some being sent through on my... Let me just... Okay. A question regarding the floods in the far north. The last flood up north somehow concluded a 1 in 500 year flood. I'm reading this out as it stands. Such statements are simply an excuse of today's lack of diligent and future-proofing of standards. What can or is DOC doing to prepare for flood slips closures of the estate?
Kia ora, great question. The department recently released a climate change action plan that it has developed, and it's a very accessible report, which I think should be on its website, which highlights some case studies of the impacts of a changing climate on species, things like alpine plants being forced higher up, having a smaller habitat, and also looking at how does the department begin to mitigate through its transitioning a lot of its fleet to becoming electric vehicles, because the work that the department does, of course, with aerial pest control, it's a lot of aviation fuel that's used for that, so there's a lot of emissions. It operates over a third of New Zealand, so it's also got a lot of vehicle-related emissions, so it is moving to electric vehicles. But it's also looking at how does it ensure that structures on public conservation land for recreation are sited, constructed and designed with a change in climate, more intense weather events in mind. And the budget also provided an additional $13.7 million because of the major flood damage which happened earlier this year in Southland, which took out quite a chunk of the Milford track down to Piopiotahī, and major damage on the Rootburn track and about 70 other tracks. So the department is very aware of floods, rising seas, storm events, taking out seaside campsites, and that's now quite a key part of planning. Department of Internal Affairs has also done a really useful report recently about natural hazard mitigation with climate, and government agencies know that flooding is one area where investment through Three Waters is best directed because of the critical impacts of flooding. So there's quite a lot of work going across government in recognising the challenges here.
Thanks, Minister. And we've got another one around water. Stormwater standards of council require urgent improvement. Note the Department of Conservation Auckland board presence in the Akura and CRL developments. Will DOC consider intervening on the standards that affect the CMA, as this is where a number of our taonga dwell and remain the first compromise in heavy rainfalls and spring tides?
Kia ora. So the government has established Taumata Arawai as a national organisation to regulate standards for drinking water in response to the Havelock North crisis and 5,000 people being sick. There's a CE been appointed to that and the organisation's getting established. It potentially also has some power to do some national, not possibly regulation setting around stormwater, but also having oversight of regional councils and the standards that they put in place in relation to stormwater discharges. And Minister Mahuta and the work she's been leading across Three Waters, it's recognised that we need to do better in relation to stormwater, and that is an area for more investment by councils, and also ensuring that the subdivision and other development doesn't lead to what's happened in some areas with very poor management of stormwater. There's an increasing recognition of the importance of urban design and the impact that that can have on improving stormwater outcomes where water is conserved, where there's less hard surfaces, but we still have a huge way to go in New Zealand in making that just standard practice. Some good models around the country, but need to be much more widely implemented. But DOC does do much more advocacy now through RMA consents, and I have made that a priority for the department. So it should be there on significant developments.
Thanks, Minister. And just in case, because you and I are on this panel and we can't see everybody else, I'm assured that there's more than 200 attendees all saying they're listening and saying what a great speech that was, Minister. So just because we feel like we're in a bit of our own bubble here. So I don't see any more questions, and I think we're just about on time. So thank you, Minister. And I have to say, in these uncertain times, it's great to hear about the progress, particularly the jobs in nature. And I also would like to say that you've spent more time in Hui with our board than any previous minister during my time on the board. And we know this is amplified by the time you spend with so many conservation organisations. So just thank you, not just for today, but for the past 3 years, and let's keep counting.
Thanks very much, Lynn. You better not say that too loudly, because I think there are some conservation boards that I haven't spent quite so much time with. But conservation boards are absolutely critical, because they are the vehicle, as you did in your introduction, for ensuring that community voices, one of the ways of taking community voices through to Te Papa Arawhai and helping it prioritise. So really acknowledge the work of boards and the work of the New Zealand Conservation Authority. Kia ora. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Mō utapu ai, hei kōrero tu iho mō ngā iwi o Tāmaki Makaurau. Mai ngā motu ki te moana, ngā here i te tihi o ngā maunga. Ana i ngā kōrero, tō tātou urunga, tō tātou kāinga noho. Tāmaki Makaurau, tāmaki here o ngā waka e.
From days of old, we have been here. With birds who graze the land to birds that grace the sky. Our spirit and the earth are one. We must protect her.
Ka pēra ki ngā ika o te moana. Ko mātou te tangata, ka hōpara, ka whakahi ki ngā rawa o te whenua nei, ko kaiora, tā mātou waiata.
Majestic is our song, nature is our chorus. For generations we have covered her, and she has sheltered us. Trees in all their splendor, plants that boast in life, her beauty clothing us all. We must work together to protect her. Your footsteps tell the story of our people, from one generation to the next. Welcome, welcome, people from every land. This too is your place to discover. From the smallest of creatures to the wonder of flight.
Ka karanga, ka ora, kei a mātou taha, i ngā wā katoa. Mai nehe rā, iku nei mātou, engari, iku nei i a mau, i a mātou.
We are graced by her presence from the land to the sea. Guardianship is our responsibility, to love, to call forward.
Tāmaki Makaurau, tō mātou urunga, o ake tōnu atu.
You may think you can do little, but in partnership we can do much. It's not just a story of old.
It's our story.
Well, since that video was first shown, which I think was at Conservation Week last year, we obviously aren't welcoming all of those people from around the world, but what it does mean is that we have access to our own beautiful nature, and as the Minister said, we should certainly be out enjoying it. As we just heard, we can best achieve our goals by working together, and there's no shortage of successful partnerships here in Tāmaki Makaurau. Tāmaki Makaurau Conservation Auckland is a new public website for the conservation community. It's being launched today by Gail Ogilvie, General Manager of Environmental Services. And she's going to give us a first look here today. The new site will raise awareness of conservation, as well as empower the conservation community, scaling up and promoting effective and responsible conservation practice across the region. Gail has held her senior role at Auckland Council for the past 7 years, following previous positions with multidisciplinary engineering and environmental consultancies in New Zealand, Australia, Asia, North America and the Middle East. 2 years ago, Gail led the environmental input to the council budgeting process, which generated a 4-fold increase in ratepayer investment in the natural environment, funded by a targeted rate. It was this funding, combined with a significant amount of hard mahi, that has turned Tāmaki Makaurau into a reality. So can't wait to hear what it does, Gail.
Ko ranganui ki ronga tēnā koe. Ko papatua nuku e takoto nei tēnā koe. No hokatika aho, e noho ana aho ke te kupuki, ko Gail Ogilvie toko ingoa. Ko toko toronga ko te General Manager Environmental Services o te Konurihira o Tāmaki Makaurau. No rewa, e mihi nui ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa. Good afternoon to everyone listening, and thank you, Lynn. My first comment is to show my appreciation for the Department of Conservation for the privilege of being able to speak at this event. I think it actually reflects the strength of the partnership between Auckland Council and DOC, which from my perspective is just a great example of the sum being greater than the two parts. Also want to quickly congratulate the organisers. I know the word pivot has become an annoyingly overused term since COVID-19 arrived in New Zealand, but it is very apt for this event. I will personally be very relieved if I do not cut out during my 20-minute slot, but I think that's reflecting my age as opposed to anything to do with the organisers' ability. So if I could have the next slide, please. So nature through nature or new eyes, what an appealing concept, which I'm sure resonates with everyone listening into this event. The latest figures, as Lynn has pointed out, are pretty grim. 4,000 New Zealand species currently in danger of extinction, and we have just witnessed firsthand the power of that taonga and the beauty and the grace that is at risk at this point. Closer to home, Tāmaki Makaurau's biodiversity has been significantly degraded over the past couple of 100 years. As shown in these maps, we now have only about 28% of our Indigenous vegetation cover, and most of this is concentrated in Aotea Island, plus Hunua and Waitapere regional parks. So what will it take for our Auckland communities to look at nature through new eyes? Certainly, COVID-19 has provided a salient reminder that nature, in this case, a tiny thread of RNA in the shape of a virus cell, can have a significant impact on humankind. On the face of it, it is one small logic step to recognise that nature can impact on us as well as we impact on it. And then another small logic step to recognise that it is in all of our interests to respect nature. I've spent my working life as an environmental scientist, and I know that logic is not nearly enough to create change. Logic will need to be supported by a whole raft of tools and initiatives that help foster the growing connection between people and nature. Next slide, please. So I'm very excited and very proud to be launching today one of those initiatives called Tāmaki Makaurau. Tāmaki Makaurau is at its core an amplifying tool. It is a website that is designed to link people with knowledge in a way that increases connectivity between organisations and information, resources and Aucklanders. Currently, this exchange of knowledge, as you'll see on the left side of this overhead, is largely siloed. It occurs between individual, local, largely local websites that connect with individual audiences, including landowners, NGOs, conservation community groups, and government agencies. Tāmaki Makaurau provides site-to-site bridges, as you see on the right-hand side of the overhead, site-to-site bridges, audience-to-site bridges, and therefore, as a result, provides a whole network of connections that wouldn't otherwise occur. Next slide, please. Tāmaki Makaurau was not created in isolation by council environmental and ICT staff in offices in the CBD. The idea was first mooted in response to loud feedback from community groups that they needed more opportunity to connect and support each other. Social research was then carried out to expand that, or really reiterate that view. The functionality of the website was then created in consultation with mana whenua, landowners, business, community groups, NGOs, schools, philanthropists, and certainly not least with government agencies, in particular Department of Conservation. A significant majority of the technical information on the website is drawn from doc resources, which are very much appreciated by council and I'm sure the rest of the sector, and reflects our strong partnership. Once a draft of the site was established, substantive user testing was carried out to fine-tune its functionality. Next slide, please. I won't take up too much time going through the detail of the site contents, and this slide's quite difficult to read, obviously, in terms of the font size. I'm assuming that everybody's going to take the opportunity as soon as this event is completed to rush into looking around the site and explore it themselves. I just wanted to give you a high-level tour. The Tāmaki Makaurau website comprises 6 sections. The first one on the left top-hand corner there is understanding conservation. So that's the big picture content. It talks about the broad scale issues to do with, for example, climate change and biodiversity loss. There's also a second section, protecting and restoring our ecosystems. And that's basically a collection of entry-level guides. So that's the basic how-to information for anyone new to conservation. Then a third area of the site is Discover Tāmaki Makaurau, which is the information that will provide to anybody interested maps, details of all of the ecological, cultural and geological values that need our protection in Tāmaki Makaurau. The fourth area is around people getting involved. This is where anybody going into the site can find events. There'll be a very active calendar, and also really importantly, connect with the conservation community through the directory that's included in the site. The fifth area is a resource library. So this is all the detailed technical information. So this is a collection of themed resources that centralise, describe and direct users to hundreds of online sources. Remembering that this site is an amplifier, so essentially it's directing people to different resources in accordance with their needs. The sixth part of the site is the Tiaki Tāmaki Makaurau conservation maps. This is an Esri web map with data showing what conservation work is happening across the region, and more importantly, what results are being observed, for example, bird life in backyards. So as Lynn has mentioned in her introduction, a couple of years ago, we did get a fourfold increase in ratepayer investment in the natural environment for Tāmaki Makaurau. And this site has been funded by that natural environment targeted rate and wouldn't have been possible without that decision being made by the politicians, which was informed by Aucklanders. So next slide, please. So the Tiaki Tāmaki Makaurau has been specifically designed to achieve a range of outcomes. Firstly, grow and amplify. As I've said, the availability of information on the site and connectivity to hundreds of other sites will amplify and grow conservation activity in Tāmaki Makaurau. Building capability. The users of the site will be able to build their own capability as the site provides a repository of both high-level general basic information and more technical knowledge. The site provides direct access to resources, training and technology that will build individual and organisation-wide capability, including quite a cool function around an opportunity to share lessons learnt on what is working and not working. Align, connect and collaborate. This is one of the most exciting functions of the site from my perspective, and it will provide a region-wide view of activity and the outcomes of this work. As the Minister has said, over the last few years there's been an explosion of community groups and also private landowners wanting to commit their time and energy to protecting our natural environment. Much of this work is localised. The site will provide region-wide metrics for improvements over time. And I think this will be highly motivational as groups and individuals can see not only the benefits of their efforts locally, but how this is adding up to generate region-wide change. We're still working on capturing good quality data, but my hope is that simple maps showing key metrics such as bellbird sightings in Auckland backyards will become a feature of the site and will capture the hearts of Aucklanders, which will drive changing how we see nature. Improving customer service. The site is simple and easy to use with really clever self-service options and a contact form. Probably the largest concern we've all heard in council from Auckland community groups is how difficult it is to work out who to approach in council. Tiaki Tāmaki Makaurau cuts through this jungle web and connects the user with the right person for the first time, either at council or at the Department of Conservation, without the need for them to understand the structure of either organisation. This will make it easier for anyone interested in conservation to not only have accesses to all the resources they need, but to directly and simply connect to the right person in the right organisation. Next slide, please. Promote and acknowledge. In addition, the site is a vehicle to promote and acknowledge great work and raise the profile of individual organisations. As I've said, this site is about connectivity, and it's about not showcasing specifically Auckland Council or DOC, but an opportunity to showcase all the other great work that's occurring from a range of individual organisations across Tāmaki Makaurau. Integrate Mataranga Māori. The website is a work in progress, and we're currently co-creating content for integrating Te Ao Māori worldview and associated conservation practices. I'm sure most people listening will know firsthand of the riches and benefits of fully embedding Te Ao Māori into our conservation work. This is another really exciting space. I think in the future, the site has the potential to link cultural and natural heritage protection. The concepts of people being different from nature are foreign to Māori, and this thinking is exactly the type of new eyesight that is needed if we're to have any hope of turning around current state. We've got a strong commitment to build these concepts into the site and, of course, into our work on the ground, but please note there is still a long way to go in this area. Raise awareness of private land conservation values. Many Aucklanders are unaware of the extent of high ecological value sites on private lands, and the spatial information on the site will raise awareness of this important part of Tāmaki Makaurau's conservation picture. And finally, increasing transparency of public spend on conservation. The site has information on both activity and also funding. Auckland Council is committed to transparency. It's such an important way to build trust between us and our ratepayers. And so the site includes information on the ratepayers' dollars that are being invested into different initiatives and projects. Next slide, please. The Te Aki Tāmaki Makaurau website provides online resources from across the web. It therefore relies really heavily on the willingness of the whole conservation community in Auckland to share their knowledge. The organisational logos you see here represent just a fraction of those that have contributed knowledge to the site. All of these organisations and many more will have links on the site. As such, the website provides a great example of the theme of today's hui, which is about regional alliances. The project essentially illustrates what can be achieved together through our alliance, without which our mahi is misaligned, siloed, and not very effective. Next slide, please. We're looking forward to using this tool to grow the connectivity between all of the wonderful and rapidly growing community-led conservation work that is occurring across Tāmaki Makaurau. Only together can we protect and restore our unique natural heritage, our ecosystems, fauna and flora, and our other natural taonga of Tāmaki Makaurau that have we heard and seen this afternoon. Only together can we connect Aucklanders' hearts to nature, and this, from my perspective, is the key to a new way of looking at nature. Next slide, please. The key to the site's success, it's not its amazing functionality and content, it is people accessing and using it. And I've been reflecting on that as I've been talking through the features for this audience. You know, it sounds like it is already there. It is very much at the start of its potential. We anticipate, it being a pivotal part of the conservation landscape in Tāmaki Makaurau, and hope that we're going to be able to achieve that outcome collectively through people using this website. From Council's perspective, we'll be working on content and will continue to be shaping the scope and functionality of the site. For example, as I've said, working with mana whenua to merge our cultural and environmental outcomes. We'll also be actively promoting the site to raise its profile. Hopefully word of mouth will be an important driver of visitors to the site as those involved realise some of the benefits I've been outlining. The website, as I said, will only realise its potential when it becomes the go-to location for anyone interested in improving Auckland's natural environment. And we also ask some things of you. Please share the site via social media and your own websites. Take the time to review the site and provide feedback. We really want to hear from you so that we can update the site in response to user needs. When the conservation directory is published, please check your details and correct these as required. Continue to produce and share your knowledge and data. The site can be accessed at these websites on the screen. So I'm very excited about both the current and future potential for Te Aki Tāmaki Makaurau to collectively harness the growing energy and passion we see around us for Aucklanders to restore our damaged natural environment, and through this experience to fundamentally help Aucklanders to see nature through new eyes. So thank you for listening. I'm not sure if we've got how much time we've got for questions, but I'll pass back on to you, Lynn, and thanks very much.
Thanks. We've got time for a couple of questions, and the first one I got actually was just asking you when the website will be launched, and I'm imagining the rush on it is going to be just like the My Lotto one on Sunday. Is it going to go crashing on with the 250 people we've got on board?
Well, Lynn, that's one of our performance metrics, to crash the web. No, not really. No, we actually soft launched the website last week internally and nothing crashed. And my understanding is this is the main launch. So it should absolutely be available through those website addresses immediately after this event is finished. So, and I'm sure it's been built to cater for at least 250 people.
Let's give them a challenge then to all of our 250 viewers and listeners today to go on and test that website out immediately. Looks absolutely fabulous. There's just a couple more questions. And I think you answered one, who maintains the site's content. That's going to be Auckland Council, is that correct?
Yeah, but when I say Auckland Council, that's Auckland Council working with our partners. DOC and Council have been, as I understand it, both really involved in the development of the site, and I think that will continue, and, you know, plus input from a range of other organisations. I sort of see us as a bit of a conductor with DOC in this space. So, you know, we'll be picking up information and amplifying or radiating it out to people. So, but we'll take the responsibility for making sure that it is up to date and that we're redesigning it as we get feedback from people and as we have ideas to further realise its potential. We're pretty committed, as you can possibly tell. And
just one final question then. Somebody's asked, will there be workshops on how to use the site? That wasn't me, actually. I'm going to look at it myself, but somebody's asked if there's going to be workshops for it.
Oh, wow. That's such a good idea, and I wish I'd thought of that question to ask the people that have built it. But we'll get a response out to that question. I'm sure there's going to be, but we'll confirm with more details when we send out the information from this event.
Thank you, Gail. That was absolutely fabulous, and we're all going to go and crash on that website at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So don't want anyone doing it just now, because we've got some more speakers and we want everybody's attention on that. And I do have a note, actually, that there was I think there was a bit of difficulty getting some of the questions for the Minister over. So we've had anyone that sent a question through that wasn't answered, the organisers will sort that out and get back to people sending questions in after the event. So that's just an update on those questions. So, yep, thanks, Gail.
Okay, thank you, Lynn, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Well, those ads are far better than anything you see on the TV at the moment for wash your hands. I think we should get those circulated. Moving on, I'm told there are sea people and there are tree people. And today we're lucky to have one of each. So I'm going to welcome Drs. Margaret Stanley and Matt Pine. Dr. Matt Pine, who, despite his name is not the tree person, is a marine biologist with the University of Victoria in Canada, who specialises in the effects of underwater noise on the marine environment. He's also principal consultant of Styles Group Underwater Acoustics in Auckland. Associate Professor Margaret Stanley is an ecologist at the University of Auckland. Her research aims to understand and mitigate the impacts of people on biodiversity, particularly the impacts on invasive species and urban development. Both will be speaking about the opportunities for nature connection that became apparent to us all during lockdown, but also how lockdown revealed stark inequities in access to nature. So welcome both.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Kia ora. Kia ora katoa katoa. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this event on essentially a golf in lockdown. So if we, before we get into it, I just wanted to acknowledge my co-authors as well, Craig Radford, Louise Wilson, and Andrew Jess at the University of Auckland, and Francis Juanes and Lauren McWhinney at the University of Victoria. So over the last 9-10 months now, we're all well aware of countries around the world entering various states of lockdowns to combat the spread of this global pandemic. Borders were closed, freedom of movement and commerce heavily restricted, internal trade slowing down substantially, bringing about what is called being called the anthropods. If we switch over to the, while the socio-economic impacts were severe and widely felt, urban wildlife appeared to enjoy the sudden and dramatic cessation of human activity. If we, thank you. News reports of wildlife quickly filled our news feeds on social media and of areas like jackals occurring in the streets of Tel Aviv, or goats taking over Welsh towns, sea lions in the streets of Argentina. And even here in Tāmaki Makaurau, we're seeing more up in North Shore and Whangaparoa, native birds being seen coming over from Tiritiri Matangi. Perhaps more hidden from view is the response of coastal marine life to this new relative calm, also being noticed. If we whales being able to navigate more freely, dolphins being spotted more often, and in areas where they just don't usually occur, it's like Venetian canals or near Spanish towns and big urban centers. Large fish species being seen nice up close to the shoreline near busy urban centers. Now, one potentially key factor in explaining the observed changes in wildlife during lockdown is noise or lack thereof. If we switch over to the next slide, please. Noise pollution is the most pervasive byproduct of urbanization, transport, and industry, and it changes the acoustic environment of which the majority of animals are acutely tuned into, especially marine life. Marine mammals, fish, and marine invertebrates depend on sound for critical life processes, and anthropogenic noise levels have been rising around the world for decades. Increasing noise under the water and coastal environments in particular due to small boats has become a substantial concern as evidence for impacting marine life in both lethal and sublethal ways is becoming much clearer. Now, recent research in the Hauraki Gulf has shown that increasing vessel noise does have the ability to reduce reduce the ability of whales and dolphins and fish to perceive their acoustic environment. And the primary mechanism for doing that is through what's called auditory masking, when a biologically important sound is drowned out by an invasive noise. Now, vessel noise is excellent at masking. It's an excellent masking noise source. Because the frequency of boat noise strongly overlaps that of natural sounds under the sea, including that of dolphin whistles. And it also overlaps the hearing range of many marine mammal and fish species. Now, dolphins are well known for their acoustic repertoires, producing a range of sounds from whistles and echolocation clicks and buzzes. And masking those communication sounds has been linked to a number of impacts on many marine species, because dolphins depend on their hearing to respond to natural underwater sounds while navigating, foraging, mating, socializing, avoiding dangers. All their behaviors have some sonic component to it. So if we just switch over to the next slide, please. So on the 26th of March, we went into our first lockdown. And from midnight onwards, on the 26th of March, for 7 weeks, the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park found itself unusually quiet, with all recreation and non-essential commercial vessels being banned from operating. Now, for the Gulf cetaceans, those whales and dolphins that depend on underwater sound for critical life processes, for finding food and locating them and coordinating behaviors with amongst each other, the reduction in vessel traffic resulted in substantial changes in their acoustic habitat, the likes of which many, or the vast majority of them, only maybe the very old whales, will have never experienced before. So if we switch to the next slide, please. So some of the initial questions, right, that was brought about from lockdown that we had right off the bat was, just how much noise pollution from small boat traffic does occur in the Hauraki Gulf? Because now that we've stopped all the small boats from operating, we can now look at changes. And we can also directly relate that to what the actual relationship, as opposed to basing it entirely on theory, is between small boat traffic and the dolphin's communication range. And we did this using passive acoustic monitoring stations, sort of forming a network on the next slide. There should be, yep. So all these red dots on this map are locations of where we have these underwater passive acoustic monitoring stations. And what's really, really, really cool about these devices, or these, using passive acoustics, is that it's completely non-invasive. The animals have no idea they're there. They just sit on the seafloor and they record 24/7. It runs passively, and we can observe the ocean in all weather conditions without actually being on the water, which was hugely advantageous when we were in a level 4 and level 3 lockdown and we're not able to physically be on the water. Now, each of these stations consists of a single Kiwi-made hydrophone, just made here in Auckland, which is an underwater microphone connected to a recorder and a battery pack, and we use a series of bespoke computer programs to process the data. Now, because the ocean is so sonic, we can learn so much from eavesdropping on her. We're tracking marine mammals, fish, vessels, weather events, noise pollution levels, of course. And what this data looks like when we pull them out of the water, if we switch to the next slide, please, from before lockdown versus during lockdown, are things like this. This is what we call a spectrogram, and the details of it's not too important for you guys at this stage. What I really want you to see is the difference between the two. We have date on the x-axis in leading up to the lockdown, in the few weeks leading up to lockdown, and we have frequency or pitch on the y, and the colors just correspond to volume or amplitude. Now, all these little colored lines on the top graph there before lockdown are from vessels, and the most noticeable difference that you see between the two is, of course, there are hardly any vessels occurring during lockdown. What we are recording are large shipping vessels coming in and out of the ports of Auckland and the odd pilot boat. This is, of course, expected during a lockdown, but these unprecedented low vessel counts did provide us the missing data points that we were never able to record before, because there are always vessels operating in the Rangitoto Channel or the Motuhi Channel and out beyond. So if we switch to the next slide, please, so what do we see during lockdown? Well, the first thing that we noticed on pretty much all our sites across the inner Hauraki Gulf all the way to the mid-Gulf, some 50 odd kilometers from downtown Auckland, was a substantial drop in the noise levels, sound pressure level, SPL. Now, the decibel scale is logarithmic. And what that means is that an increase in noise of 3 dB equates to an approximate doubling of acoustic energy. So a drop from 110 dB, like we see in Rangitoto Channel, the first 2 bars on this plot, ST1. The first thing that we see is that 110 dropped to about 103 for a daily median sound pressure level, equates to more than a 2-fold decrease in the acoustic energy within that habitat, which is pretty big. And these kind of drops were seen across the inner Gulf all the way to the mid Gulf, the ST5 there, which is 50 odd kilometers from downtown Auckland, which just shows how far that recreational boating propagates, how far the noise from these small boats actually propagates into these more deeper water habitats where the Brooder's whale does reside. Now, during lockdown, things were really quiet too. That was the other thing that was kind of astounding to us, was in terms of the overall noise level, 93 dB, which was our minimum sort of median level over the whole lockdown period, which we recorded out in that mid-Gulf, is comparable to what we've measured in areas like the high Arctic, which can range from 64 odd dB to 101, 102 dB. And I mean, that's crazy. That's quiet. We've never recorded such quiet levels in a temperate region anywhere in the world, let alone New Zealand. Of course, if we switch to the next slide, of course, the other big thing that we recorded was this massive drop in vessel noise, which was explaining our drop in our noise level. But it's the level at which they dropped that was so astounding. In the 10 days leading up to lockdown, we recorded 866 recordings of vessel noise in just 10 days. And in the 10 days immediately after lockdown, we recorded only 310. So that's a pretty big drop. And in fact, after 3 weeks of lockdown, we had logged only 488 vessels. So still only 56% of the presence we recorded in just those 10 days before lockdown. So, right, so how do we use all this to start getting into more interesting things? So if we go to the next slide and we see these relationships, if we plot the daily presence of vessel noise that we record at, say, Rangitoto Channel with our corresponding noise level, we start to see these really strong trends and these sort of curves. Now, remember when I said lockdown provided us with those missing data points that were impossible to achieve previously? Everything from 30 to 40% on that x-axis that you see in front of you would be impossible to record without lockdown. Lockdown has provided us those missing data points and essentially gave us this trend. And so now we can see that after 7 weeks of lockdown with these really quiet, and we had glorious weather during March as well, in April, that we can see if we increase our daily presence by roughly 10%, our vessel noise presence by 10%, then we can expect approximately 2 dB increase in the noise level. And that's we saw that across the Gulf and on all our sites. On the next slide, we'll see that similarly, the vessel counts, those very low vessel counts, meant that for the first time ever, we are able to see a more natural baseline sound level for what the Gulf is in the absence of all this recreational boating, meaning that we now know how much vessel noise can impair a dolphin's ability to communicate over long ranges. So now on the y-axis here, we've switched from sound pressure level to what's called a median communication range. Now, communication range is just the distance within which two dolphins can talk to one another. So if you're beyond that communication range, you can not hear each other. And so you've got less area available to swim together and maintain communication, which is important because the larger the area, the more area they can cover to forage, for example, because they can spread out further and still work together to find and round up fish. So if you're increasing your levels by, like your percent increase is 10% in vessel presence, your communication range drops by approximately 50 meters near the city, but as much as half a kilometer out past the noisies. And that's just because the levels were lower than in the busy shipping channel. So what does all this mean at this stage? Just finishing off now, if we switch to the next few slides. It's all, one of the things that we really notice right away is, of course, noise pollution. It doesn't linger. It's not like carbon in the atmosphere or free radicals deteriorating in the ozone layer. It disappears as soon as the noise is removed or even just reduced. And even just reduction in the noise level, even if it is a 10% reduction, we do see a big drop in noise level that has a very positive effect on the Hauraki Gulf. So there is hope for positive change moving forward, and it's not a complete loss, so it's definitely worth doing. And it's really great to see all these conservation initiatives coming out that we've seen just this afternoon, listening to everyone. And next slide. And it's important because these data feed directly into cumulative noise models, so we can better predict how future growth is going to look, and we also get a much better understanding in how vessels and how many vessels are required to raise noise levels and impair communication in marine mammals and fish. Next slide, please. And for new resource consent applications, these data feed into that as well, because now we have a better understanding on how long-term developments and activities may cause acoustic disturbance in marine life through cumulative noise pollution. And the last step is we're continuing to work with these data to test for changes in marine mammal vocalization, so how these animals talk to one another, and that tells us how these animals adapt to noisy environments in the future and how they possibly avoid masking effects as well, and the behavioural changes. So thanks very much for listening. I'll stop there because of time. Got any questions or anything, feel free to email, no problem at all, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Matt. That was absolutely fabulous. And you probably know Dr. Andrew Jeffs, who's our deputy chair. The points around the marine acoustics were what we submitted to the CRL hearing, and I can see a lot of what you've just produced there will be so useful to us in future submissions that we'll be making on behalf of the board. So thanks very much. And we'll move on to Margaret.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, no te whare wānanga o Tāmaki Makaurau ahau, ko Margaret Stanley ahau. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you about fascinating events that have happened, and here we go again. But at least I hope some of you are able to watch this from your garden, if you've got a device and a hammock, or at least a nice view out of your window where you're connecting to nature. So speaking of nature, we had some pretty impressive looking nature footage come across our screens from across the world. If we can have the next slide. So yes, as Matt said, everything from mountain lions and goats to turkeys. But what about New Zealand? What was happening in New Zealand? Next slide, please. So yeah, the news, the social media and traditional media was full of stories of piwakawaka in the CBD in Wellington. We had reports of koromako bellbirds in suburban Auckland. Next, please. But did nature actually thrive in our cities during lockdown? And I think this is the tricky thing, because we actually don't know. And although many of us, I hope, were staying iNat home and recording on iNaturalist and on eBird, we actually don't really have any rigorous baseline measures. And I think this underlines the importance of resourcing rigorous long-term monitoring, not just for pandemics, but for climate change and any other drivers that are going to come along. Next, please. So did we actually see more wildlife during lockdown? Well, there was a lot of confounding factors that made it really tricky. And one of them was the drought, which was actually quite a severe drought, as we all know, in Auckland. Some of us, whether we had water tanks or whether we were ignoring the advice, had well-watered gardens. So they were very attractive to wildlife. Some of us even had bird baths or feeders. Or was it just the confounding factor, the positive confounding factor, that we have been doing such amazing backyard trapping, and maybe those effects are what we're starting to see? Or is it just because we finally stopped, we slowed down, and we looked and we observed that cabbage tree moth on the handle of the door? So I think there was a fair bit of that going on as well. But of course, it is possible that actually with the lack of cars and the less noise, there was actually more wildlife in the same way that was happening in the marine environment that Matt was just showing you. So we know from our research on urban birds in Auckland that the higher the decibels, the more likely you're going to see fewer native bird species. So we do know that now. Next, please. But I think the key point is actually, does it really matter? And I think one of the really important things was that people actually notice, and people for once were talking about biodiversity and they were connecting to biodiversity. It was all over the news, and actually there was some action. So New Zealand Birds Online website, their website visits jumped up 42%. So people were actually seeing things and then wanting to know about them. So you can see from the top searches here for April, fantail pea waka waka came out on top. So yeah, it is enough just for people to be connecting to nature. Next slide, please. So people really need nature connections, and people being part of nature, an integral part of nature, is exactly what Indigenous cultures recognise, and I think it's come out really well in the latest biodiversity strategy around te ao Māori, and that our livelihoods and our well-being are dependent on biodiversity. So it's really great to see that. The science has shown in the last decade or so really good evidence that people being connected to nature gives us really good improved health and well-being outcomes, particularly for both physical and mental health. Next, please. So a great example in the literature is that a 10-minute walk on the left-hand side in your local bush patch, away from the cars and the concrete, will significantly lower your stress levels and your blood pressure. So this is measurable. And I'd have to say that if I went for a walk on the one in the right-hand side, past all the weedy palms, that my blood pressure would be a little bit higher too. Next slide, please. But I think a key thing I want to talk about is whether all New Zealanders are connected to nature, because most of us live in urban areas away from the conservation estate. More than a third of us live in Auckland. Not that many of us are able to go on great walks, may not be able to access or even just go to regional parks. And I think our local parks are quite spatially variable what the access is like. And I think it's very clear from our demographic data that community conservation is not connecting all people with nature, that some people aren't connecting with nature at all. And so then we have to ask, really, is the nature connection a luxury? Next, please. So this is what some people may have been able to experience during lockdown when walking around their streets. A lot of vegetation there. Next, please. But likewise, this is what a lot of other people had in their neighbourhoods when they walked around. So there's a lot of inequities in access to nature. Next, please. And this has come out really recently in the conversation and what's happening in Melbourne at the moment, where they have to stick within their 5K radius of their home. There's a lot. That's a lot of Melburnians who have no or very little parkland within 5Ks of their home. And I think COVID's bringing this to a fore. It's also really obvious for some that it's even harder. So often disabled residents have to go quite far to find a park that doesn't have stairs and it has flat paths. So what's this access like for us? So this stark inequities in access to nature came out in Auckland's urban ngāhere strategy. And the images on the left, the top is Mangere and the bottom is Mount Eden, and you can see how different the tree cover is, particularly street tree availability. And the figure on the right shows the urban forest cover, with the dark green being 30% or more forest cover, but right down to the red where it's barely even present. And given what we've just been talking about with the well-being and health benefits associated with nature and urban forest, then again, our most vulnerable communities are missing out on all of these benefits. Next, please. So it's really good to see in the biodiversity strategy that's just been launched that connecting people with nature is one of the key outcomes, but we really have to emphasise that it has to be connecting all people with nature. Next, please. And unfortunately, we're going a little backwards in our urban areas. This is just the Waitemata local board, but it's a very similar picture across all of Auckland that we're rapidly cutting down our urban forest and we're losing it. So given the importance of it, we're actually going backwards. Next, please. So how do we improve nature connection for all? Well, one of the ways might be through schools. We know that our children spend a long part of the day there. I'm sure some parents are wishing the schools were open now as they get through the day. But I think one of the issues with schools is they often view trees through a risk lens. Are kids going to fall out? Are tree branches going to fall over? What's the health and safety risk? Also, surprisingly, the Ministry of Education does not fund trees or vegetation because they're not seen as infrastructure, so concrete and building, they're not seen as assets, which given their benefits and the services they provide is a real shame. And I think, again, we're coming back to equity issues. Is it only going to be the richer school communities that are able to actually give our children the benefits of this vegetation and the trees? Next, please. So this is a pretty fancy playground. I'm sure when I was a kid I would have loved this. I probably would still love it now. It's pretty flash. The only problem is it's really disconnecting the children here from nature. There's not really any connections to be had. In contrast, in the next slide, we can see what's been happening with the wonderful Marahupara, the traditional Māori playground, and this one's from Oakley Creek Walkway, and it's wonderful to see this supported. It has all of the play skill benefits of that first playground. Aesthetically, I think it's more pleasing to me, maybe not to others, but it has these other benefits that we weren't getting in terms of cultural benefits, biodiversity, nature connection benefits. Next, please. So if we were gamers, we'd talk about leveling up. So yes, we can have playgrounds, but we can also level up to get those cultural and biodiversity benefits as well. And I guess that's why I'm kind of pushing for multifunctional spaces. We should add in nature where we can. And here's a sports field in Auckland. We have loads of them. I'm not suggesting we get rid of them, and hopefully we're not going to build houses on them. But what they often have, like in this picture here, is quite a lot of mown grass around it that is not playing surface. And we can reduce the mowing and the maintenance and all those negative aspects by putting some groups of trees in here and adding biodiversity. And so we probably end up with this biodiversity linkages all across the city through sports fields and golf clubs and the like. So creating multifunctional spaces, not for one purpose, but leveling up and adding up all those other benefits is where we need to go. Next, please. And I guess I've been a bit cheeky here, maybe tongue-in-cheek, that we should start adding trees into middle of cycle lanes. But the point I'm trying to make here is that currently we separate vegetation and nature from infrastructure. And when we're building infrastructure, we think about the infrastructure and not integrating it with nature. Next, please. So, yes, we like this light path in Auckland. It's won awards. It gets people moving, which is great, but I see it as separating people from nature. If we look at the bottom images here, this is the High Line in New York, where they're actually integrating the pathway with nature so people can make that connection. So we really need to not have this either or siloed approach of infrastructure versus green space. Next, please. So one of the ways we're going to get biodiversity back, hopefully not having lockdowns all the time, is we need to accept messy. And I've stolen a tweet from Beck Stanley here, where I think Europe is much more accepting of what we call the low mow and not having these close clipped lawns that we do in Auckland. Having this messiness will actually bring back invertebrates, which in turn will also bring back our birds. And the middle image there is really around structure. So we need to get structure back. We can't just have these isolated trees in the middle of lawns. We actually need to have all layers of forest, from herb right through to shrubs and trees. And if you haven't seen the animation by Manaki Whenua, their Gardens Like Layer Cakes, go and have a look at that. But I think that's a really good way of communicating to people that you need all of the layers of vegetation, because birds use those different layers for different purposes. So accept messy, people. Next, please. And I think we need to get better at showcasing biodiverse gardens. So this is the prize-winning garden from the Block New Zealand Hobsonville series, which is pretty awful. I think it would make most ecologists cry. And I think we need to figure a way of getting better ideas about gardening out to New Zealanders. So we need to be on board with these, and I'm sure there'll be ecologists, not me, willing to get on the tally there and get some ideas out. Next, please. I think one of the things we need to do is give native plants better PR, because when you talk to people, they think they're very drab, olive green colours, and perhaps don't realise the vast array of beautiful flowering plants that we have that would be brilliant in gardens. Next, please. But the problem with this is, if we want people and we want to show them about native plants and gardens, we actually need to remove barriers to action, so that when people go into a garden store and they see the sign that says native plants or shrubs, that there are actually native plants and shrubs underneath. So how can people who want to do the right thing actually take action? Next, please. And what we want people to remember is how connected their houses and their backyard is to the local habitat patch. So that's where the birds are spilling over from into your backyard, especially for during lockdown. But we want them to move out of those bushes into our backyard, even when it's not lockdown. And we also need to remember that what we do in our backyard actually spills over into that precious habitat patch. Next, please. And so, you know, the weed on the left there choking up our local parks from people's gardens, people's cats and pets like lost parrots spilling over into those precious habitat patches. We need to ask people to stop feeding breed and seed to birds. It only encourages the introduced species and pushes out our native plants. We need to keep doing those actions like pest management in our backyard to improve outcomes for birds. And hopefully sooner rather than later, we can tip our car fleet into electric. So hopefully that will start mimicking what was happening in lockdown with quieter vehicles and give the birds a bit of a break from that noise. Next, please. We also need to give nature and cities, particularly trees, better PR, because at the moment we're in deficit thinking that they're just trees coming down in storms and they're bad in cities. We need to make sure people are aware of how much those benefits outweigh the risks, and right tree in the right place. Next, please. We need to fix this. We need to stop chopping and we need to start planting, but remembering that a seedling doesn't replace a mature tree. So stopping the chopping is what we need to do first. Next, please. And I think we need to have hope and a little faith in our fellow humans, that every action counts, that we need some positive messages and choices. So on the right there is a picture of an indoor cat. So getting some messages out there, like was in Predator Free Trust newsletter a few weeks ago, about how indoor cats can be happier, healthier and cheaper. And I think if we have a greater understanding of Te Ao Māori and how people are an important part of nature, then that will start bringing people along. But we actually also need to remember to bring everyone along for the ride, not just some or most of us. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thanks, Margaret. That was absolutely fabulous. And I'm so delighted that somebody is going to tell me that my messy garden is actually ideal. We have had a few questions, but in the interest of time, what I'll suggest is that we send them to you directly and get some answers that way. If you're happy with that, I just want to make sure that we have time for our next speakers as well.
That's fine, thank you.
Tukua, Karen Leone and Grant Crawford, and they will share what happens when mana whenua and community collaborate to manage protection and regeneration of the marine environment. So over to you guys. Lucy or Karen, I'm not sure which is which, but could one of you, whoever's speaking, would you unmute yourself? We can't hear you. No, still can't hear you. Grant, would you? I can see that you're nodding there. Can you perhaps start the presentation while we sort it all out?
Yes, kia ora. Perhaps we could play our video and then we'll just see if we can get Lucy's sound working. If that's okay, Shay, and if you could just play our introductory video, please.
The ocean, I guess, means quite a few things to me. I guess it's my backyard, my training ground, and I guess where I get most of my enjoyment from.
I guess I've realised recently that I need to have access to the sea to be happy. It's something that keeps me really kind of sane and grounded.
For me, the moana is a cultural thing about identity. Who we are as a people. You know, we're tangata whenua, but we're also tangata moana.
The more I spent time on the island and the more I got to know other people and other projects that they were involved in, I started to learn about like the problems in the water and the kind of degraded state of the marine environment around the island.
Yeah, so I've seen definitely, I think over time, the amount of fish go down. The fish are a lot less abundant, whereas the plastic pollution, there's a lot more of.
There's a huge difference. A huge difference. That difference is that things have just disappeared. I've seen mussel beds go, whole mussel beds. I've heard of oyster beds disappearing. The thing about the ocean is you see the surface. You don't really see the changes below it.
If it keeps going the way it is, yeah, it'll be pretty heartbreaking, I think, for the whole world.
What happens if we don't leave that for our next generation or for the generation after that? And they're looking at these desert oceans going like, what were those people doing? What were they thinking? why didn't they do something while they still could?
I think that people need to have the importance of the Gulf communicated to them and its state of health communicated to them first to better understand why we need to make changes to how we interact with the ocean.
The conversations and discussions and debates and learning about like the biggest challenges ahead of us are really important, but it has to go hand in hand with action.
Let's educate each other and educate ourselves by being more conscious about what we have. How are we going to look after it for our grandchildren coming through?
Thanks everyone, kia ora. Just checking whether Lucy can now, if we can hear Lucy, we may start with Lucy, as because this is about a third of the way through our planned presentation. Apologies. Lucy, how are you going? Okay. What perhaps we'll do is I'll continue with my piece in this, and then we'll see how we go after that, and perhaps Corinne could follow me as planned. So thanks everyone for watching the video, which was the first introductory video in our series. I'm sure you'll agree it amplifies what the sea means to many in our community. Since this introductory video, our team have created a further 8 podcasts, 6 minutes each, and these can be viewed on our YouTube channel. They are interviews with people from our 9 defined voice categories. The first 3 or 4 were created during the level 4 lockdown, and they were using cell phones and homes. Like our team of 5 million, we are trying to create innovations from this adversity. The photo on the screen now, beautiful photo, is a pair of oyster catchers. This name was chosen back in 1731. Previously, the British called these birds sea pie. What a crazy name. Today, we prefer to use torea. Peter Ree's beautiful image points to our catchphrase in the project, which is join the conversation. All of our project expressions to this point point to this. We've invited a diverse voices to the Future Search Hui, and this will make the event successful. Today we've heard from speakers on just before us on seas and trees, which is very apt. In my personal observation, there's a rising appreciation on Waiheke Island of the interconnected nature of the land and the sea, and the importance of considering these areas together when restoring the coastal environment. There's also a sense of consciousness that the effects of lack of action will be felt for many generations. Next slide, thank you. The delay of our Future Search Hui, which was caused by the pandemic, has given the opportunity for a deeper conversation. We've used this time wisely to help each other in our project teams and our audience with a deeper understanding of context and preconditions. We've been able to explore and define more vividly what the expectations and outcomes might look like. There's been a focus on conveying what good might look like rather than solely focusing on the negative. Interestingly, those interviewed in our video series often referred to their negative experience in their answers. This tells us there is a wide and growing understanding of the issues. Next slide, please. One of the most exciting outcomes of having additional time has been a new website project. We sought design input to reflect the project's mana and the partnership with Mana Whenua, given the texture of the voyage that we're all on. We were introduced to Deja Manuel, who has created this beautiful Mata Kupanga pattern, which will be woven through our future visual material. Deja has assisted me with the following explanation of her work. There are many variations in Mata Kupanga design, and it is a form used in Hauraki for local iwi carvings. It is a strong yet subtle design and portrays the intricate weave of the fishing net, one of the many tools for Mana Whenua, Mana Moana, who have lived extensively in this coastal area. We've discovered over time and through this project the decline in sea life, biodiversity and ecosystems both locally and more broadly across Te Kapa Moana. The Mata Kupanga represents an abundance of kai moana in the Te Kapa Moana, which is now depleted. It reminds us to be more conscious over harvesting and to support the recovery and the rebalancing Maori. It also demonstrates the resourcefulness of gathering kai to survive. For our Waiheke Marine project, the Mata Kupanga represents the gathering of many voices to ensure the survival of Te Kapa Moana. Next slide, please. We've redirected resources due to this extra time to a number of new communication tools designed to inform, educate, engage, and stimulate conversation around the issues faced by the marine environment. These examples on screen are of a graphic series that we've released every 2 weeks, and we plan to continue those up to the event and perhaps beyond our September future search. In addition to these, we've used our monthly e-newsletters, social media print adverts, and a sea-focused photography competition to build the project's sense of relevance in our community. One of our most successful engagement tools has been the Ostend markets held on Saturdays. Here we've captured sea stories, which are personal accounts of individual experiences and observations with the sea around Waiheke. We currently have a display at the Waiheke Library, albeit behind closed doors at present. Currently, our plans for engagement post Future Search see a week of public displays planned at Waiheke Village locations. And next slide, please. I'd now like to extend sincere thanks to our sponsor partners. Often this is part of a closing remark. However, such as their caring for this project, and a little bit apt seeing we're having technical problems today, we would like to acknowledge these friends during the main course of our presentation. Waiheke Local Board, GIFT, Working Together More Fund, Foundation North, Auckland Council, Department of Conservation, Waiheke Collective, and the Hauraki Gulf Conservation Trust. We'd also like to thank those who have supported the project in kind and acknowledge the thousands of volunteer hours, many of which are with my friends in the various work streams, and which is underpinning this project. Now I would like to introduce Corinne Leone, if we can get Corinne. Corinne, where to from here? How do we step from the sand and board the waka together and start this voyage of restoring abundance of our Te Kapa Moana? Corinne, do we have you?
Can you hear me?
I can.
No? Oh, okay. I was just wondering, shall we just go Lucy and then I can go after Lucy?
Are you back, Lucy?
I hope so. Kia ora.
Yay. Kia ora.
I know. Talking about waka. Te kapa moana e nguru nei au e ha ko Ngāti Pāoa e nguru nei au e ha ko te kapa te moana ko kohu nui te maunga ko Ngāti Pāoa te iwi ko Ngāti Hura me Ngāti Kapu ngā hapu Ko te kutuiti tuarua te wakatapu, ko Lucy tuku a hau. Our project Whakataiki reflects the intrinsic mana of Waiheke, a special place, a resonant vibe that brings our senses alive. It defines a kawa or a rule that is non-negotiable. Waiheke ki uta, collectively we embrace the sanctity of the whenua ki uta and actively seek to protect and regenerate the many puna, tributaries, wetlands and estuaries that reach down into Te Kapa Moana. Waiheke ki tai, we acknowledge the mauri of our wai, wai tai and wai Māori and its kawa. Mana whenua celebrate our whakapapa connection to all our relations of the moana. We are all custodians. Waiheke ki tua, we are guided by our Creator, ngā atua spiritual kaitiaki, and our ancestors to uphold our spiritual practices to uplift nature, our place, our people. Right now, at this time, on the incoming tide, under the guidance of Maramataka, our lunar calendar, today is not a day for productive harvesting. Today we sow the seeds for our future. We have seen and heard through the first COVID wave that Papatūānuku has her own plan. Kia matara, be alert. E mihi tōku moana ko Te Kapa Moana ki o Waitapu. My ancestral waters greet your ancestral waters. Next slide, thank you. Muki Muki Pa, the headland on the left heading into Mātiatia Bay, is one of our many sentinel sites. Our sacred sites and also our pūrākau reflect our relationship with this place. Ngā poitō o te kupenga a Taramainuku is an example that refers to the floats of the net of Taramainuku, encompassing Waiheke, Pōnui, Rātaroa, Pakatoa and the wider Gulf Islands. It is important that our pūrākau and our mātauranga Māori are deeply embedded in the work, as yesterday's markers for our tamariki today and for our mokopuna tomorrow. I acknowledge all mana whenua that have a cultural connection to this island and to these waters. We as hapu of Ngāti Paoa have engaged on this project with support from both the Ngāti Paoa Iwi Trust and the Ngāti Paoa Trust Board, therefore allowing us as ahika to engage directly in the process. We acknowledge Piritahi Marae, the essence of Kia Piritahi, the ancestral house that beckons us to come together, fostering kinship and whanaungatanga, ngā mihi. Whānau are excited to be on a collaborative journey partnering with the community to ensure that all voices are heard. We are cognizant of those without a voice and that everyone will have a view. We invite you to the table, kānohi ki te kānohi. It is important that a place-sourced mana whenua, community-led, regenerative framework underpins the way in which we will all need to evolve from surviving to thriving. Without nature will we cease to live, and caring for Papatūānuku has to take precedence in our co-re-evolution. Ko waiheke tōku kāinga, ko waiheke tōku tiranga waiwai. Next slide, please. Regenerative practice is in direct alignment to the Marine Spatial Plan's guiding vision that is as relevant today as it was 7+ years ago when it was created. The repositioning of Te Kapa Moana map is a mana whenua view, where at this reversed mana whenua view of Te Kapa, the Coromandel Ranges represents the barb of the fish, Te Ika a Maui. The Ahu Moana proposal within the Marine Spatial Plan is an important proposal that is worthy of exploration and ripe for localised discussion. What happens in Te Kapa Moana, and in particular around Waiheke, is unique. This is active citizenship at its finest. In hindsight, and as a mana whenua representing the stakeholder working group, I believe it was a blessing for Waiheke to not have been included in the plan. The mana sits with us to define what is best for our environment. Through developing an intimate relationship between place, culture, and community. We are best positioned to bring a focused approach to tackling our local issues and to celebrate the gains moving forward. Te mana o te taiao, te mana o waiheke. We now have an opportunity to realise our local impacts, both positive and negative, in order to bring about our own sense of balance and change. We are owning it, but we also know that issues are tikapa wide. The health of our people is a reflection on the health of its environment. We have a long way to go. So at this time, I'd like to hand it back to Kieran. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko Karenioni tuku ingoa, I te tau tōku papa no hauraki ahau ko Ngāti Paua te iwi. So for the past year, I've been working on the mana whenua work stream Ngāti Paua ki Waiheke Rōpū with community group stock and other key stakeholders. And today I will be talking about our next steps, where to from here. So where to from here? Through working on the Waiheke Marine project, we know it is vital that mana whenua and local Waiheke community groups work together towards the common goal of kaitiakitanga, protection of our land, seas and waterways. We know that there is a need to continue to support and build capability and capacity by way of developing leadership roles, including social procurement and iwi and community, particularly where the structure around climate change, sustainability and environment protection is still being developed. For some iwi, like Ngāti Paua, who have not yet reached settlement with the Crown, and as a result of other mana whenua with limited structure, these are resources in terms of gaps that need to be filled. So in terms of our way forward, over the last year, Ngāti Paua have worked with the local Waiheke community groups to achieve the shared goal of kaitiakitanga, sustainability and environment protection. And I believe this is the type of mahi that should be happening right across Aotearoa with all mana whenua. The Future Search event is another event which shows co-leadership in this space is vital to achieve the shared goal of marine protection. Co-leadership in terms of facilitation and planning provides great examples of mana whenua working well with DOC and communities, ensuring there is a strong kaupapa Māori mana whenua lens on decision making and planning. The Hauraki Golf Forum is another example of co-governance with mana whenua, which has been another success, meeting the Crown's responsibilities of true partnership in the kaitiakitanga leadership space. More importantly, we also need to work together to get our rangatahi and our next generation on board through relationships with schools, community groups and iwi. This needs to be a proactive approach where resource could be provided for young people to be given the time and space to come up with their own ideas around what kaitiakitanga means to them and what active role they want to play in it. There has been significant change in other areas of education, but we also know there needs to be even more work done to address this very urgent issue in Aotearoa. Like many of these important issues for our country, there are some forums in place that support marine protection. However, it's my view that we need to implement a new style of leadership going forward, which ensures key partnerships between mana whenua and community at grassroots, central and local government level. This needs to be a priority for our country going forward, working together and bringing the next generation along with us. We are proud of our beautiful country and our beautiful island Waiheke. Now let's make it a priority for communities with mana whenua to work together to protect the mauri of the environment in Aotearoa. As one of our key funding partners, the Waiheke Marine Project would like to particularly acknowledge the support of DOC, specifically Miranda O'Connell, who's been our Manu Tātaki Partnerships Manager, key co-facilitator and Future Search Project Manager role, while supporting the Ngāti Paua ki Waiheke Group, our mana whenua work stream. We are grateful for the time, energy and resource which has been contributed to this amazing project. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Thank you for listening. And I don't think we're going to have time for questions. So, kia ora.
Kia ora. That was absolutely fabulous, and I note as well that Miranda has presented to the board as well about the work that's going on in that you're doing and keeping us updated. I just acknowledge now that for our viewers and listeners, we've now got 3 websites that I want you to go and hit on the minute we leave, and give some really positive feedback to all of our speakers today. So thank you for that, and I think these are exciting times for all of us in conservation. Thanks, team. So today's speakers represent the huge diversity of talent and experience we have in New Zealand. And I'd like to thank everyone for the time today, and to each of you for joining this somewhat different 2020 celebration of Conservation Week. I'd now like to invite Otene to close this event with a karakia.
Kia ora tātou, kua tau mai ki te hakarongo ki ngā kōrero a kui mā korama. Just our greetings to all that have taken part in this online hui today. So, kai te mihi tonu kia koutou Ngāti Pāwa, Lucy, Leonie, tēnei te mihi kia koutou mō. E rā kōrero e pāna ki tō motu a Waiheke, nei rā te mihi, kia ora tātou. So to close our hui this afternoon, I give this karakia for you. Kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātea te ara, kia tūruki whakataha ai, kia tūruki whakataha ai. Haumi e, hui e, tā iki e. Kia ora tātou, mauri ora.